A new report by insolvency firm MNP highlights some concerning trends around interest rates, the rising cost of living, and its impact on Canadian households. It says 52% of Canadians say they are $200 or less away from not being able to pay all of their bills at the end of the month. The result for the July report is up 6 percentage points from 46% in April. The report says 35% of those asked say that they already don't make enough to cover their bills and debt payments. This is up from 30% in April and a record high for the survey. Household debt has been identified as a key risk for the economy by the Bank of Canada, which is scheduled to make its next interest rate decision tomorrow. Well, joining us now to unpack this report is Mr. Wesley Cohen, licensed insolvency trustee at M&P. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
Now, the figures in this report are quite alarming, but from your perspective, are they surprising?
Well, not entirely. Considering high inflation and that the many successive interest rate hikes we've seen, it's not entirely surprising that Canadians are struggling with their finances, particularly those with high debt loads.
And on the topic of debt, we know one of the key issues identified is service payments for credit cards. So, for a little bit of perspective, just how indebted are Canadians?
Canadians are more indebted than they have been in the past. In terms of those who are unable to manage their bills and debt payments as the cost of living rises, they may be resorting to credit cards to supplement their income. If they fall into arrears on those payments, late fees kick in and interest accrues quickly, making it difficult to catch up. TransUnion, for example, has found that the average Canadian consumer has a credit card balance of about $4,000 and a line of credit of over $34,000. So we are quite indebted.
Quite indebted indeed now, and that unfortunately isn't the only kind of debt affecting Canadians. So, what are some other factors at play here that are weighing Canadians down?
Well, we got auto loans, lines of credit, mortgages, certainly, and we've seen some pretty high mortgages with those increased housing prices over the past few years, as well as the factor of payday loans. When folks get into trouble, they sometimes will resort to those kinds of high interest and high repayment loans. And another interest rate increase, possibly tomorrow, will make those debts even more unaffordable. And as the cost of servicing those debts goes up.
And we know housing, as you highlighted, is obviously a huge factor at play. As you mentioned, the Bank of Canada is going to be making its interest rate decision tomorrow. If an interest rate hike is to be part of that decision, how do you see that impacting Canadians? Do you see them being pushed off the edge financially?
Well, considering that more than half, 52% of Canadians report being $200 away or less each month of not being able to cover their bills and debt payments, another interest rate hike could make more individuals insolvent. For those already without any wiggle room, this could push them into debt. Anyone who's worried about being unable to pay their monthly bill payment should speak to a licensed insolvency trustee to understand what all their options are. LITs can conduct a confidential financial review and provide unbiased advice on a range of debt relief options, including budgeting, debt consolidation, and more, depending on the situation.
And while we've got you here on camera, would you be able to give us some advice for anyone who's watching this who may be dealing with their debt? What kind of steps should they take right now to maybe soften the blow of a potential another interest rate hike coming up tomorrow?
Well, certainly, although interest rates are on the rise, there is obviously a way of moving debt from higher interest kinds of debt, like credit cards and that kind of thing. If you have the ability to borrow and use a line of credit or even a secured line of credit, if you happen to have a house, you can reduce those interest payments considerably, which will make your monthly payments lower and hopefully over time give you the ability to pay down and ultimately pay off that debt.
Some helpful advice there. Just about a minute left here, Mr. Cohen. But what will you be watching for after tomorrow's interest rate announcement by the Bank of Canada?
So, looking at it, I mean, we're talking about, or it's been hinted at anyway, perhaps a quarter of a percentage point increase tomorrow, which will bring us to 5%. And so, one of the things that's concerning to me, certainly as a practitioner in the insolvency field, and knowing over the past 2, 3, or more years with, the increase in housing prices and the rather large mortgages that people have taken on, when those mortgages come due, what's that going to mean to their monthly mortgage payment going forward with a renewed mortgage? And so, this is a big concern around that because of the increased interest rate and the affordability then of those mortgages going forward.
A big concern indeed. Mr. Cohen, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily. All right, we have to go to break now, but when we return, we're going to be discussing a precedent setting legal decision in Nova Scotia on the issue of sex work. Now, despite the fact that the buying of sexual services is illegal, a judge has ruled in favor of a sex worker over the non payment of services. We're going to be sitting down with Jessica Rose, the lawyer who defended this sex worker in this case. After that, we'll have more news from around the world, so stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. Stay with us.